This story is titled, Mom and Dad Discovered I Was Making More Money and Demanded I Sponsor Them Even More, while my golden brother who got fired was living in the apartment I paid for. So I took everything and kicked him out. They hired a lawyer, but that was a big mistake because now they lost everything. Hey Reddit, my name is Marcus, and I'm 26 years old. This probably sounds like one of those unbelievable family drama posts that make you question whether people actually behave this way, but unfortunately, it's my actual life. And I'm still processing everything that happened. This is a story about how I got absolutely played by my own family. Not in some dramatic movie way, where everyone's screaming and throwing things, but more like they ran a whole elaborate scam operation and either didn't even realize what they were doing, or maybe they did, and just didn't care. Let me rewind to about 14 months ago when this whole mess started. At the time, I was working full-time at a digital media company where I'd been employed for a couple of years. The job was going all right. Nothing particularly fancy or glamorous, but it offered decent hours and okay money. After saving up consistently for months, I had finally accumulated enough to start seriously looking for my own place. I'd been sharing an old rental house with 2 roommates in what could generously be described as a sketchy area of town, and I was more than ready to experience living solo for the first time in my adult life. That's when my parents, Robert and Patricia, decided to share some news with me that would completely change the trajectory of my living situation. Robert is 52 years old and Patricia is 51, and they had just purchased this brand new luxury apartment in South Beach. They explained that they'd been looking at real estate investment opportunities for a while, apparently wanting to diversify their portfolio or whatever financial strategy they were pursuing. At first, my reaction was simply supportive. I told them, "Cool, that's great for you guys," and didn't think much beyond that initial conversation. A few days later, Patricia called me up with what seemed like an incredible opportunity. "Marcus, we've been talking, and since you're actively looking for a place to live anyway," she began, "why don't you just move into the apartment instead of continuing your search?" I was genuinely surprised and asked, "Wait, really? You're serious about this?" She confirmed that they were completely serious, explaining that the unit was just sitting there empty at the moment, and pointing out that it was extremely close to my office location. When she said close, she meant an 8-minute walk kind of close, which was practically unheard of in our city's traffic-heavy landscape. That proximity factor alone was enough to sell me on the idea immediately. No more sitting in bumper-to-bumper traffic for 45 minutes each way, no more desperately circling blocks looking for parking spots, no more arriving at work already stressed from the commute. I could literally sleep an extra hour every single day and still make it to the office on time. The convenience factor was absolutely incredible. They took the time to carefully explain all the terms and conditions of this arrangement. I would live in the apartment while paying what they described as low rent, just enough to cover the basic upkeep and maintenance costs. In addition to that modest rent payment, I would be responsible for handling all the utilities, keeping the place in good condition, and generally treating it like it was my own home. The whole arrangement seemed completely fair and mutually beneficial from every angle I could think of. I would get access to a solid living space in the desirable South Beach area, and they would have someone reliable and trustworthy living in their investment property instead of having to go through the hassle of trying to find complete strangers to rent to. Patricia even made a point of emphasizing why they felt comfortable with this arrangement. "You've always been the dependable one, Marcus," she told me with what seemed like genuine warmth and appreciation. "We know we can trust you to take care of things properly." I'm not going to lie. Hearing that acknowledgement felt really nice and meaningful. Growing up, it had always been crystal clear that I was considered the responsible one in the family dynamic, while my younger brother Trevor was perpetually cast in the role of the unpredictable wild card who couldn't be counted on for anything serious. Trevor is 21 years old and has spent his entire adult life bouncing around from job to job without ever really settling into anything stable or long-term. He's tried what feels like a dozen different side hustles and get-rich-quick schemes, and every single one of them has gone absolutely nowhere. He's lived with our parents off and on whenever his latest venture inevitably collapsed, treating their house like a revolving door hotel where he could crash whenever reality caught up with his poor decision-making. Meanwhile, I had taken the traditional route. I went to school, earned my degree through hard work and dedication, consistently paid all my bills on time, and managed to avoid creating chaos and drama in everyone else's lives. So naturally, I accepted their generous offer without much hesitation. I moved into the apartment just a couple of weeks later, excited about this new chapter in my life. However, I need to be completely clear about the state of the place when I first walked through those doors. The apartment was absolutely, completely empty. I'm talking about no furniture whatsoever, no curtains covering the windows, not even basic appliances like a microwave. It was essentially a beautiful blank canvas with gorgeous potential, but zero personality or livability. The layout itself was genuinely stunning, though. The apartment featured these massive floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with natural light, a sleek, modern kitchen with high-end finishes, and impressively tall ceilings that made everything feel spacious and airy. It was like living inside an architectural magazine spread, except for the minor detail that it looked like a vacant model unit that no human being had ever actually inhabited. So I rolled up my sleeves and got to work transforming this empty shell into a real home. Every single paycheck I received went toward purchasing something new for the apartment. First, I invested in the essentials, a quality mattress and bed frame so I'd have somewhere decent to sleep. Then came a comfortable couch for the living room, followed by a proper desk setup for the days when I worked remotely from home. I bought a dining table that could accommodate guests, built-in shelving units for storage and display, and blackout curtains because those gorgeous tall windows became an absolute sunlight nightmare during the early morning hours. I didn't stop at just the basic necessities either. I carefully selected area rugs to add warmth and texture to the space, hung artwork on the walls to give the place some character, and even bought real plants, not fake ones, to bring some life and natural elements into the environment. I genuinely didn't half-ass any part of this process. If I was going to be living in this space and calling it home, it absolutely had to feel like a place where I actually wanted to spend my time and energy. I spent several months slowly but steadily turning this sterile, empty unit into a genuinely livable and welcoming space. The transformation was remarkable. It went from looking like a real estate listing photo to something that could have been featured in a Pinterest board about budget-friendly apartment styling. I kept detailed receipts for absolutely everything I purchased, though at the time, I was doing it mostly just for my own personal organization and budgeting purposes, not because I was anticipating any future legal complications or disputes down the road. Back then, I genuinely thought to myself, hey, I'm investing in creating a space that's truly mine for the foreseeable future. Every time my parents came by to visit and see how things were progressing, they were absolutely floored by the transformation. Patricia once looked around the fully furnished living room and told me, "It looks like a real home now, thanks to you, Marcus." Robert nodded in agreement and added, "You've done such a great job, son. It's so much more livable than we ever imagined it could be." Hearing that kind of recognition and appreciation felt genuinely good, and I was proud of what I had accomplished. I'd wake up each morning, make my coffee in the kitchen I had fully stocked and organized, and sit on the couch I had carefully selected and purchased, feeling genuinely proud of the space I had created. There were no more frustrating roommates to deal with, no more mismatched thrift store furniture that didn't coordinate with anything else, and no more compromising on comfort or style. It was just me and my thoughtfully curated living space, exactly the way I wanted it to be. That peaceful, settled-in vibe that I had worked so hard to create lasted for approximately 6 months before everything started to fall apart in the most unexpected way possible. Then, one Tuesday morning, I was heading out the door to start my day when I received a phone call from Patricia. Her voice sounded completely normal and sweet, exactly like it always did during our regular check-ins. She started the conversation by asking how things were going with the apartment, and I enthusiastically told her that I was absolutely loving the place and still felt incredibly grateful for the opportunity they had given me. The conversation was flowing along these perfectly pleasant, routine lines when she casually dropped what felt like a nuclear bomb into the middle of our chat. "Oh, by the way," she said in the same tone someone might use to mention the weather forecast, "your brother's going to be moving in with you soon." I literally froze in the hallway where I was standing, like someone had reached through the phone and pressed a pause button on my entire morning routine. "Wait, what? Trevor was moving where, exactly?" "Into the apartment," she clarified, speaking as if she was sharing the most natural and obvious piece of information in the world. "Just for a little while," she continued. "He's had kind of a rough stretch lately, and it'll help him get back on his feet." I found myself completely speechless, standing there with my mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, trying to process what I had just heard. After what felt like an eternity of stunned silence, I finally managed to form words. "You're serious about this?" I asked. "Yes," she replied without any hesitation. "We figured it wouldn't be a big deal since you've got the space. And it's not like you're ever there during the day anyway, right? That assumption was just completely wrong on multiple levels. I work remotely 3 to 4 days per week, which means I'm actually home the vast majority of the time, not out gallivanting around the city like she seemed to think. But beyond the factual incorrectness of her statement, I was struggling to understand how this decision had been made without any input from me whatsoever. I honestly didn't even know how to react to this bombshell. The whole thing was presented in such a matter-of-fact way, like I had absolutely no say in the decision and was just the guy who happened to be keeping the apartment warm for when the actual family favorite felt like moving in and taking advantage of the situation. I didn't argue with her, not because I agreed with what was happening, but because I was too completely shocked and blindsided to form coherent words or thoughts. And then, as if the situation couldn't get any more surreal, the very next day, Trevor showed up at the apartment. He didn't bother to text me ahead of time, didn't call to give me a heads up, didn't do anything that might be considered basic courtesy or communication. He just buzzed up to the apartment and walked in like he owned the place, dragging 2 oversized suitcases behind him, carrying a gaming chair under one arm, and clutching a bag of frozen burritos like it was some kind of essential survival equipment. "Yo, what's up?" he said by way of greeting. "Mom and Dad said I can crash here. That cool?" There was no apology for the lack of advance notice, no acknowledgement that this was a massive change that might affect my living situation, and certainly no offer to help contribute to bills or household expenses. He just dumped all of his belongings in what had been the guest room and started spreading out like it was a college dorm room that he had every right to occupy. And me? I just stood there staring at this guy who had now, apparently, become my new permanent roommate without anyone bothering to ask if that was something I wanted or was prepared to deal with. That moment, standing in my carefully curated living space, watching Trevor claim territory like he was planting a flag, was the beginning of what I now think of as the end of everything I had worked so hard to build in that apartment. The first full day with Trevor living in the apartment set the tone for everything that would follow. And let me tell you, it established a pattern real quick. I woke up that morning to find the guest room door standing wide open with his belongings already exploding outward into the hallway like some kind of domestic explosion had occurred overnight. There were shoes scattered around, random charging cords snaking across the floor, and a hoodie just lying there in the middle of the walkway like it had given up on life. When I made my way to the bathroom, I discovered that the sink was completely covered in dried toothpaste splatters, as if he had been conducting some kind of oral hygiene experiment that had gone horribly wrong. The kitchen counter told an equally disturbing story. There were crumbs everywhere, 2 open snack wrappers just sitting there like abandoned evidence, and a half-drunk energy drink positioned right in the center of the counter. Not chilled in the refrigerator where it belonged, not properly sealed to maintain carbonation, just sitting there at room temperature like it was some kind of decorative centerpiece that I was supposed to admire. There was no, "Hey man, where should I put this stuff?" or, "Sorry I made a mess, I'll clean it up." There was just chaos and disorder, and this was only day 1 of what I was beginning to realize might be a very long and frustrating living arrangement. By that evening, Trevor had taken it upon himself to completely rearrange the living room setup to better accommodate what he called his gaming station. And when I say gaming station, I'm talking about a full-scale operation complete with a massive PC tower, 2 large monitors, LED light strips that could probably be seen from space, and a literal folding table that he had apparently retrieved from our parents' garage. He pushed my carefully selected coffee table off to the side without bothering to ask for permission, and set up his entire command center right in front of the television, treating the space like it was his personal studio apartment rather than a shared living area. He didn't ask for my permission. He didn't offer to find a compromise that would work for both of us. He just did whatever he wanted and expected me to deal with the consequences. So I approached him calmly and asked, "Hey, are you planning to keep this setup in the living room permanently? Or is this just temporary while you get settled?" He shrugged his shoulders with complete indifference and replied, "Yeah, my room doesn't have enough electrical outlets for everything, and I get way better Wi-Fi signal out here anyway." I just stared at him, waiting for some kind of acknowledgement that this was a shared space, or perhaps an apology for completely transforming the room without discussion. Instead, there was no apology, no offer to make adjustments, and not even a fake, "let me know if that's cool with you" gesture. The next morning, I had to retreat to my bedroom to work remotely because Trevor was outside in the living room yelling at his teammates during some intense shooter game at full volume. I had important meetings scheduled with clients, and at one point my boss actually had to mute himself during our video call just to laugh and ask, "Is that Call of Duty happening in the background?" It was incredibly professional, and exactly the kind of impression I wanted to make during important business discussions. When I brought up this issue with Trevor later that day, I got the classic Trevor response that I should have seen coming from a mile away. "Oh, just tell me when you're on meetings," he said dismissively, "and I'll wear my headset so it won't be a problem." Spoiler alert, he never, not even once, actually wore the headset when I was working. Every single day that followed just added another layer to this growing pile of frustrations and inconsiderate behavior. Dishes would stack up in the sink, even though I had already shown him where the dishwasher was located and how to operate it. Leftovers that I had bought and prepared would mysteriously disappear from the refrigerator. Orange juice would be consumed down to about half the container and then put back in the fridge without the cap properly secured, leaving it to go flat and potentially spill everywhere. One day, I came home to discover a fork just sitting on the couch cushion. Not hidden under the cushions where it might have fallen accidentally, but just resting there on the surface like it was supposed to live there as part of the furniture design. But the absolute final straw that week came when I arrived home to find Trevor and 3 of his friends completely camped out in the living room, gaming and yelling and essentially trashing the place like it was their personal fraternity house. There were empty takeout containers scattered everywhere. My carefully selected area rug was stained with what looked like sauce or soda. The kitchen sink was overflowing with dirty dishes, and one of his friends was literally eating food directly out of a cooking pot with a serving spoon. Trevor looked up from his gaming setup when I walked in and casually said, "Yo, hope you don't mind? They'll probably bounce soon." He didn't ask for permission. He didn't apologize for the mess. He just assumed that I would be perfectly fine with my home being turned into a gaming den for him and his buddies. I didn't even bother to respond to that statement. I just grabbed my keys and walked right back out the door, because if I had stayed in that apartment for even one more minute, I would have said something that I definitely couldn't take back and would probably regret forever. But here's the thing that really started to mess with my head and make me question what I had gotten myself into. At this point, nobody had bothered to tell me how long Trevor was planning to stay in the apartment. There was no conversation about, "Hey, it's just for a few weeks while he gets back on his feet," or "We're thinking maybe a month or 2 at most." There was absolutely no end date provided, no timeline discussed, and no exit strategy mentioned by anyone involved in this decision. And judging by the way Trevor was settling into the space and making himself completely at home, this definitely wasn't looking like a temporary arrangement. This man had brought 3 different pairs of sneakers, a full keyboard stand for his gaming setup, and one of those massive beanbag chairs that takes up half a room. You don't bring a beanbag chair unless you're planning to stay for the long haul and really make yourself comfortable. So, trying to be the mature adult in this situation and handle things through proper communication, I called my parents to ask for some clarity about the timeline. "Hey, I was just wondering how long Trevor is planning to be here," I asked, hoping for a straightforward answer that would help me understand what I was dealing with. Patricia answered with the same casual tone she had used when dropping this bombshell on me in the first place. "Oh, we're not really sure yet," she said, as if we were discussing weekend plans rather than someone living in my home indefinitely. "He just needs some time to get back on his feet, you know. He's been through a lot recently." "What exactly has he been through?" I asked, genuinely curious about what kind of major life crisis had necessitated this emergency living arrangement. The answer I received was absolutely enlightening. Well, he quit his job at the warehouse because he didn't like working in retail, and then he moved back in with us. Let me just pause here for a moment. That's not a life crisis. That's not being through a lot. That's just Trevor being Trevor, making impulsive decisions without considering the consequences and then expecting everyone else to accommodate his choices. Patricia continued with a sigh. "Marcus, we just want you to be supportive of your brother during this difficult time. You've always been the stable one in the family, and we know you can handle this situation." And there it was. That sentence again, the one they always used to rope me into fixing problems that weren't mine to fix and handling situations that I never agreed to be part of. "You've always been the stable one." That phrase used to sound like a compliment when I was younger. It made me feel valued and appreciated for my responsibility and reliability. But now, in this context, it felt less like recognition and more like a life sentence. It felt like they were saying, "You're the dependable one, so you have to deal with whatever we throw at you, whether you like it or not." Later that night, I decided to attempt having an honest, straightforward conversation with Trevor about the situation, and try to establish some ground rules that would make this living arrangement work for both of us. "Look, man," I said, "I don't mind helping you out during a rough patch, but you've got to meet me halfway here. This isn't just your personal crash pad where you can do whatever you want. This is my home, and it was my home before you moved in. You can't just treat it like your college dorm room where nothing matters. Trevor's response was to laugh like I was telling him some kind of joke. Bro, relax, he said dismissively. I'll get out of your hair eventually. Don't stress about it so much. Eventually when? I pressed him for some kind of concrete timeline or plan. He shrugged his shoulders with complete indifference. I don't know, man. When things settle down and get back to normal, I guess. Are you actively job hunting at all? I asked, hoping to understand what steps he was taking to improve his situation. Yeah, I've been thinking about some different options, he replied vaguely. I might get back into reselling sneakers online, or maybe try getting into cryptocurrency trading again. My guy actually said, get back into cryptocurrency trading again, like it was a structured career plan with a steady salary and benefits package. That's when I realized something important and troubling. Trevor wasn't just temporarily staying with me while he figured things out. He was essentially living here now, with no concrete plans to leave and no real effort being made to change his circumstances. If he was going to be living in my space indefinitely, then he should obviously be contributing to the rent and expenses, right? That seemed like basic common sense and fairness. The next day, when I was sitting down to pay the monthly bills and handle all the financial responsibilities of maintaining the apartment, I casually mentioned to Trevor, "Hey, rent's due on Friday. Do you have your share ready yet?" He didn't even pause his video game or turn his head to acknowledge that I was speaking to him. He just kept mashing buttons on his controller and said, "Oh, I don't pay rent here." I thought maybe I had misheard him or misunderstood what he said. "What?" I asked, wanting to make sure I had heard correctly. He paused his game for exactly 2 seconds, turned to look at me and said, "Yeah, Mom and Dad didn't say anything about me having to pay rent. They just said I could stay here for a while. They didn't mention anything about money being involved." He said this like he was genuinely shocked that I would even suggest such a thing, as if the idea of contributing financially to a place where you live and eat and use utilities was some kind of foreign concept that had never occurred to him before. I couldn't even formulate a response to that statement. I just walked straight into my room, sat down on my bed, and stared at the floor for about 15 minutes, trying not to punch a hole in the wall out of pure frustration. The next morning, I called Patricia again to get some clarification about this rent situation that Trevor seemed to think didn't apply to him. "Hey, I talked to Trevor about contributing to the rent," I began. "And he told me that he doesn't have to pay anything because you guys didn't mention it to him." Patricia's response was delivered in the same matter-of-fact tone that she had been using throughout this entire ordeal. "Oh, right. We didn't want to stress him out with money issues right now. He's in a bit of a rough patch financially, so we figured it would be better not to burden him with that responsibility at the moment." "So I'm the only one paying to live here?" I asked, wanting to make absolutely sure I understood the arrangement correctly. "Well, you're doing really well financially," she replied, as if that somehow justified the completely lopsided arrangement. "We figured you'd be okay with handling the rent for now while Trevor gets back on his feet. It's not that big of a deal, is it?" Not that big of a deal. Those words just hung in the air while I processed what I was hearing. I didn't even bother to argue with her or express my frustration. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't sigh dramatically, I didn't even push back on the logic. I just sat there listening to my mother explain to me why being the responsible one in the family meant that I now got to financially sponsor Trevor's free vacation in South Beach while he figured out whether he wanted to pursue sneaker reselling or cryptocurrency trading as his next career move. After that conversation, I started keeping detailed track of everything that was happening in the apartment. I created a folder in my email and another physical folder on my desk where I began documenting expenses, situations, and Trevor's behavior patterns. I didn't really know why I was doing it at the time. I just had this gut feeling that I was going to need this information eventually. And as it turned out, I wasn't wrong about that instinct. I tried to go back to my normal daily routine of work, errands, and basic survival, but everything felt different now that I knew I was the only one covering all the financial responsibilities. Suddenly, every light that Trevor left on felt like someone was literally burning my money right in front of my face. Every 8-minute hot shower he took felt like a personal slap, and I'd hear that microwave running at 2 in the morning, only to discover the aftermath of some midnight burrito explosion covering the inside of the appliance the next day. And guess who had to clean up that mess? Spoiler alert, it wasn't Trevor. I wasn't sleeping well anymore because every little noise in the apartment started to annoy me beyond reason. I found myself wearing headphones in my own home just to tune out Trevor's loud TikTok videos and Discord calls with his gaming friends. The sense of peace and tranquility that I had worked so hard to create in that space was completely gone, replaced by a constant feeling of tension and the nagging thought that this isn't how things were supposed to go. One evening, I was sitting at the kitchen counter eating a simple pasta dinner. Nothing fancy, just trying to have a quiet meal after a long day, when Trevor emerged from his room, looked around the kitchen and announced, "Dude, we're out of olive oil. You need to grab more when you go to the store." "We?" I asked, emphasizing the word. "Yeah, for the apartment," he replied, as if I was the designated grocery department manager responsible for maintaining household supplies that he also used but never contributed to purchasing. I stared at him for a moment and then said, "You know where the grocery store is located, right?" He looked genuinely confused by my question for a few seconds, then responded, "Oh, I just thought you handled that kind of stuff since you're already going there anyway." That's when the full scope of his assumptions became crystal clear to me. In his mind, I wasn't just his roommate or even his brother helping him out during a difficult time. I was the designated caretaker of this home that he had decided to freeload in, responsible for maintaining everything while he contributed absolutely nothing to the household. That conversation was the moment I realized that Trevor was never going to step up and take responsibility on his own initiative. Not with the way our parents had set up this arrangement, and especially not after they had reinforced the idea that I was supposed to just handle everything while he got a free pass. But even with that realization, I still didn't blow up at him or lose my temper. I didn't have a dramatic confrontation or start yelling about fairness and responsibility. I just nodded calmly, took mental notes of what had just happened, and kept adding details to my ever-growing documentation list. This situation was moving beyond just being annoying or frustrating. It was evolving into something that I was eventually going to have to take decisive action about. I just wasn't sure exactly when that moment would come or what form that action would take. Then, without any warning or advance notice, my parents invited me to lunch the following weekend. I met them at this small cafe that they frequented, thinking that maybe this was going to be a check-in conversation about how things were going with the living arrangement. Or perhaps they wanted to discuss Trevor finally taking some concrete steps to improve his life situation and become more independent. But no, that's not what this meeting was about at all. Patricia pulled out her phone, scrolled through her photos for a moment, and then handed the device to me. On the screen was a photograph of the apartment. My apartment, the space I'd been living in and maintaining and paying for. I looked at the image with confusion and asked, "Why are you showing me this picture?" She smiled with what appeared to be pride and excitement, and said, "We've been thinking about listing the unit online soon, maybe as a longer-term lease opportunity for someone else." Robert jumped into the conversation to add, "Yeah, the property value has gone up significantly since we bought it, and it's such a nice setup now thanks to all the work you've put into it. You've made it look absolutely fantastic." I blinked in confusion and said, "What are you talking about? I'm currently living there." Patricia continued, as if my living situation was just a minor detail to work around. "We know you're there now, but we figured it's time to start considering other options for the space. Trevor could stay there, of course, but maybe we could rent out your portion to someone else who might be willing to pay market rate." My portion? I actually laughed out loud when she said that. Not because anything about this was funny, but because the entire conversation was so surreal and disconnected from reality that laughter seemed like the only appropriate response. "You mean kick me out of the apartment and let Trevor continue living there for free?" Both of my parents looked uncomfortable for a brief moment, but Robert pushed ahead with their plan. "Look, Marcus, you've had a really good run in that place. You've enjoyed affordable rent in a South Beach location, and it's been a great opportunity for you. But you're doing really well financially right now, and it's probably time for you to find a place that's actually your own." I couldn't believe what I was hearing from them. "You offered me this place," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "You specifically told me I could live there as long as I paid the rent, covered the utilities, and kept it in good condition. I've held up every single part of my end of that agreement. Meanwhile, Trevor moved in without any invitation from me, and he's done literally nothing to contribute to the household. Now I'm the one being asked to leave?" Patricia gave me that fake, patronizing soft tone that I absolutely hate. "Marcus, don't make this into an emotional situation. We're just trying to be practical about our investment," Robert added without missing a beat. "If you really want to stay in the apartment, we can definitely talk about that option. But it's time for you to start paying what the place is actually worth in today's market. From now on, we're going to need to double the rent you've been paying." I stared at him in disbelief. "Double it? We need the extra income right now," he explained. as if I was supposed to nod understandingly and say, "Ah, yes, of course, that makes perfect sense. And it's really only fair considering everything you're getting from the arrangement. We just can't keep offering you below market rent anymore." "So let me make sure I understand this correctly," I said slowly, wanting to be absolutely clear about what they were proposing. "You want to raise my rent to double what I'm currently paying while Trevor continues to live there for absolutely free?" Patricia jumped in quickly. "We already explained to you that he's not doing well financially right now, Marcus. We thought you would understand and be supportive of your brother," Robert added without any hesitation. "Well, if you don't like the new arrangement, you can always move out and find somewhere else to live." I just sat there staring at both of them, waiting for someone to start laughing and tell me this was all some kind of elaborate joke. I was waiting for them to say, "kidding," or "gotcha," or anything that would indicate they weren't being completely serious about this proposal. But no one laughed, no one even cracked a smile, and no one showed any sign of backing down from what they had just laid out. They were completely serious about this plan. Here I had spent months transforming an empty unit into a fully furnished, comfortable home, and now they were telling me that if I wanted to continue living there, I would need to pay double the rent because Trevor couldn't contribute anything financially. They didn't see this as unfair or unreasonable. They genuinely thought I would be okay with this arrangement, that I'd smile and say, "Sure, I'll happily subsidize the golden child while you lease out my peace of mind to the highest bidder." I didn't even bother trying to argue with them or explain why their proposal was completely unreasonable. I just paid for my portion of the meal and walked out of the cafe before I said something that would permanently damage our relationship. That night, I returned to the apartment and looked around the space with completely new eyes. It didn't even feel like my home anymore, despite being filled with my furniture and decorated with my personal touches. The comfortable, welcoming vibe that I had worked so hard to create was completely gone. I couldn't shake the conversation from earlier that day. It was like a countdown timer had started ticking in the back of my mind. I wasn't just frustrated or annoyed anymore. I was actively being phased out of the living situation I had built from scratch, and they were expecting me to either pay double to subsidize Trevor's free ride or gracefully exit so they could profit from my investment and hard work. Trevor was playing some video game when I walked into the apartment that evening, just like he always was. He turned around in his gaming chair and casually said, "Yo, you think we can get one of those fancy ice makers? Like the nugget kind that makes the really good ice?" I didn't even acknowledge his question. I just walked straight into my room, opened up the folder where I had been keeping all my receipts and documentation, and spread everything out on my desk. Every single piece of furniture I had purchased, every kitchen appliance, every decorative item, every light fixture, even the shower curtain. All of it dated, sorted, and itemized with meticulous detail. I opened up a Google document on my computer and started creating a comprehensive running total of everything I had spent to make this apartment livable. This wasn't just about feeling frustrated anymore. This was about documenting my investments and preparing for whatever came next. I wasn't entirely sure what my end game was going to be at that point, but I knew with absolute certainty that I wasn't going to just walk away quietly and let Trevor coast along on my financial investment while my parents patted him on the back for getting settled into his new comfortable lifestyle. I gave myself a firm deadline, 1 more week. After that, I was taking everything that belonged to me and leaving this situation behind. And when I say everything, I mean absolutely everything that I had purchased and paid for. I didn't tell anyone about what I was planning to do. I just started the preparation process slowly and methodically. First, I went through each room of the apartment and made a detailed checklist of every single item that I had bought with my own money. I went into full accountant mode, documenting each item with its purchase price, the date I bought it, and which store I had purchased it from. That comprehensive list included the couch that had become the centerpiece of the living room, the bed frame and mattress I slept on every night, the nightstands, my desk setup, the TV stand, the television itself, the area rug that tied the whole room together, all the lamps that provided ambient lighting, the toaster and other small kitchen appliances, the silverware and dishes, the shower curtain and bath mat, the shelving units I had assembled, the dining table where we ate meals, and even the stupid little fake succulent plants that I'd bought to add some ambience and personality to the space. I also went back through the receipts folder that I'd been maintaining throughout my time in the apartment. Originally, I had kept these receipts just in case something broke down and I needed to return or exchange an item, but now that folder was becoming my golden ticket and proof of ownership. Everything was documented in my name, with charges to my bank card clearly visible on the statements. Online orders had delivery confirmations sent to my email address, and in-store purchases had physical receipts that I had tossed into a drawer out of habit rather than for any legal reasons. Once I had my comprehensive list completed, I took updated photographs of the entire apartment. I went room by room, taking wide-angle shots and detailed close-ups, making sure everything was date-stamped to create a complete before gallery of what the space looked like before I removed my belongings. This would document what was about to be transformed back into the hollow, empty echo chamber it had been when I first moved in. Then I went online and booked a moving truck for the following Saturday morning. I rented one of those large box trucks that you can get by the hour, and I specifically got the biggest one available just in case I needed the extra space for all my belongings. Throughout this entire planning process, Trevor remained completely oblivious to what was happening. The guy was busy binge-watching anime series and playing Fortnite, like he had just discovered the existence of oxygen and entertainment. When he wasn't actively gaming, he was sprawled out on my couch eating cereal directly out of a salad bowl because apparently regular bowls weren't large enough for his needs. He asked me midweek if I could grab more paper towels because we're completely out, and I just said sure, then made a mental note to pack the half-used roll that I had already purchased when I moved out. Friday night arrived, and I stayed up much later than usual, going through every drawer and closet in the apartment. I packed everything that belonged to me into bins, bags, and boxes, being extremely careful not to touch anything that Trevor had brought with him. To be fair, that wasn't very much. Mostly just laundry baskets filled with clothes that never seemed to make it into any kind of organized storage system, and a box labeled random tech stuff that I was about 99% sure contained nothing but tangled charging cables that he refused to throw away. Around midnight, I took one final look at the apartment in its fully furnished, cozy state. It still looked welcoming and put together, with all the personal touches and carefully selected items that had made it feel like a real home. But I knew that in just a few hours, all of that was going to change dramatically. Saturday morning arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, and I rolled that moving truck into the building's loading zone. I buzzed up to the apartment and let myself in, ready to execute the plan I had been methodically preparing all week. Trevor was still fast asleep in his room, completely unaware that his comfortable living situation was about to change dramatically. I started hauling my belongings out of the apartment systematically and efficiently. I had my detailed checklist in one hand and my phone camera in the other, documenting every single item as I removed it from the premises. This wasn't just about moving out. This was about creating an indisputable record of what was happening and why. About an hour into the process, when I was roughly halfway through clearing out the living room, Trevor finally woke up and emerged from his bedroom. He came stumbling out in his pajama pants, rubbing his eyes and looking completely disoriented by the activity happening around him. He looked at me rolling up my area rug and asked in confusion, "Dude, what are you doing?" I looked up from my task and answered simply, "Moving." He appeared even more confused by this straightforward response. "What do you mean you're moving?" "I'm leaving," I explained matter-of-factly. "I'm taking all my stuff with me. The stuff I bought, the stuff I've been paying for, the stuff that belongs to me." Trevor blinked several times like the morning sunlight was personally offending him. "Wait, like you're actually moving out of the apartment? For real?" "Yep, today," I confirmed. He glanced around the living room and began to notice the bare patches where furniture used to be. The couch was gone, the television had been removed, the shelves were completely cleared out. "You're really going to take all of it?" he asked incredulously. "Every single piece?" "The apartment was completely empty before I moved in," I reminded him. "It's going to be empty after I move out." Trevor stood there processing this information for a moment, then asked the question that really showed how little he understood about basic adult responsibilities. "Bro, what the hell am I supposed to sit on?" I shrugged my shoulders and gave him the same energy he had been giving me for months. "Figure it out. That's not my problem anymore." Trevor stood there in the middle of the increasingly empty room, like he genuinely couldn't believe this was actually happening. Then he pulled out his phone and said, "I'm calling Mom right now." "Go ahead," I told him, and continued with my work. Sure enough, about 2 minutes later, my phone started ringing. Patricia called first, and I ignored it completely. Then Robert called, and I ignored that one too. Then both of them started calling again repeatedly. When I didn't answer any of their calls, the text messages started flooding in. "Marcus, what's happening? Are you really taking everything? You can't do this to your brother!" I didn't respond to any of their messages. I just kept moving my belongings methodically and efficiently. I was on a mission, and nothing was going to derail me from completing it. By noon, the moving truck was completely full, and the apartment looked exactly like a vacant model unit that nobody had ever lived in. The walls were bare, the rooms were echoing with every footstep, and there was nothing left except Trevor standing in the middle of the empty floor space, looking like a confused stray animal in an abandoned food court. Right before I walked out the door for the final time, Trevor made one last attempt to guilt me into changing my mind. "You're screwing me over, man," he said. "What am I supposed to do now?" I looked at him and said, "Pay rent, buy furniture, and be an adult for once in your life." Then, I locked up the apartment and left him there to figure out his own situation. About an hour later, after I had gotten everything safely into a storage unit, my phone buzzed again with another message. This time, it was Patricia texting in all capital letters. "You cannot legally remove fixed items from the unit. This is theft." They were actually accusing me of stealing stuff that I had bought with my own money, stuff that I had installed and maintained, stuff that I had receipts and documentation for. The audacity was absolutely incredible. So I replied to their accusation just once and only once. "Everything I took was mine. I have receipts, timestamps, and photographs. If you think you have a legal case, feel free to sue me." And you know what happened next? They actually did exactly that. They decided to take me to court over this situation. The next thing I knew, I was receiving a certified letter from a lawyer claiming that I was being sued for $16,000 in stolen property. They were alleging that I had gutted the apartment and compromised its intended function. Those were their exact words, not mine. I wasn't even angry when I read that letter. If anything, I was actually impressed by the sheer boldness of their legal strategy. So I gathered up all my documentation, every receipt, every photograph, every email, every text message, and sent everything to my lawyer, Hannah. When I say everything, I mean absolutely everything that could possibly be relevant to the case. My lawyer built our countersuit in less than a week after reviewing all the evidence I had provided. We weren't just going to defend against their lawsuit. We were going after them for court fees and damages. At that point, this wasn't even about the money anymore. This was about principle and standing up for myself. If they wanted to treat me like I was just supposed to take whatever they dished out without any consequences, fine. But they shouldn't act surprised when the person they had been leaning on financially decided to walk away, taking everything they had taken for granted with him. Their lawyer was this guy named Richard Davis, and his first email to my attorney was absolutely loaded with puffed-up legal language about unauthorized removal of property, disruption of intended use, and lack of consent. It was the kind of intimidating legalese that was clearly designed to make me back down and settle out of court. My lawyer, Hannah, who by the way is an absolute beast in the courtroom, read through their entire argument and literally said to me, "Okay, so they've got absolutely nothing to work with here." She laid out the situation with crystal clarity. Yes, the apartment was legally owned by my parents. That was never in dispute. But everything inside that apartment was mine, purchased with my money, delivered in my name, and completely provable through what she described as a ridiculous trail of evidence. I had receipts for everything. Time-stamped photographs showing the apartment's transformation, email confirmations, and even text messages from Patricia, complimenting the work I had done on the space. Hannah had cataloged and organized everything into a comprehensive case file. The best part of our evidence collection was a screenshot I had taken from a family group text conversation, where Robert had literally written, "We're lucky Marcus made it livable. We didn't do a thing to help with any of it." That single line made Hannah raise her eyebrows and say with satisfaction, "That quote is going in bold letters in our presentation." Meanwhile, I was living out of boxes in a short-term rental while waiting for this legal situation to resolve itself. Honestly, I didn't mind the temporary inconvenience at all. The peace and privacy felt like five-star luxury accommodations after the chaos and stress of the previous months. Every single day that I woke up without hearing Trevor slamming the microwave door shut or yelling at his gaming teammates was a genuinely good day in my book. The hearing date finally arrived, and we found ourselves in small claims court. It wasn't a huge, dramatic courtroom with a gavel-banging judge or any order in the court television drama vibes, but it was still official and intimidating in its own way. I showed up wearing a clean, professional button-down shirt and brought all my documentation in clearly labeled folders. Robert and Patricia arrived acting like we were about to participate in some kind of peaceful family mediation session. Patricia even gave me this tight-lipped artificial smile like she still believed this was all just a big misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a simple conversation. Robert didn't even make eye contact with me during the entire proceedings. Their lawyer attempted to kick things off with this elaborate presentation about expectation of shared furnishings and the intent to provide the apartment in a fully livable condition. He even pulled out a printed photograph of the apartment in its furnished state, using my furniture, of course, and dramatically declared to the judge, "This is how the unit was meant to be presented and maintained." Then Hannah stood up calmly, pulled out our meticulously organized folder, and said in a clear, professional voice, "Your Honor, we have over 60 individual receipts, all in my client's name. We have time-stamped photographs of the apartment in its completely empty state on the day he moved in. We have comprehensive before and after comparisons showing the transformation. We have text messages from the plaintiffs specifically acknowledging his work and personal purchases. And we have utility records and maintenance costs, all covered exclusively by my client since day one." She didn't need to raise her voice or get dramatic. The evidence spoke for itself. The judge methodically looked through the substantial stack of documentation we had provided. Everything was labeled, color-coded, and even organized with tabs for easy reference. Within about 7 minutes of reviewing our materials, you could see from his facial expression exactly where this case was heading. He looked directly at their lawyer and asked, "Do you have any receipts or documentation proving that these items were purchased or owned by your clients?" Their lawyer coughed uncomfortably, shuffled through some papers that clearly didn't contain what he was looking for, and said, "We don't have receipts for the individual items, but there was an implied agreement about the furnishings being part of the rental arrangement." The judge nodded slowly and responded, "Implied agreements don't override documented ownership, especially not when there's clear, consistent evidence spanning such a long period of time." Patricia looked like someone had just unplugged her from a power source. Robert tried to interject with some explanation, but the judge cut him off before he could get started. "You are the legal owners of the property," the judge continued, "and that fact is not in dispute here. But the furnishings, decorations, appliances, and even the shower curtain were purchased and provided by your son. That is also not in dispute based on the evidence presented. My parents were still trying to argue something about gifting the furniture because I didn't specifically label everything or make them sign ownership agreements, but Hannah immediately hit back with, "If putting a couch in an apartment qualifies as an irrevocable gift, we should all be terrified to lend anyone so much as a chair." The judge actually chuckled at that response, and that was the exact moment I knew we had won this case decisively. Then the judge asked if I had incurred any financial harm or additional costs as a result of their actions. That's when we pulled out the comprehensive spreadsheet that Hannah had helped me finish preparing. It detailed all my original purchases, all my moving costs, the expense of renting the storage unit, the security deposit I'd had to pay for my short-term rental, and various other damages that had resulted from their lawsuit. We didn't even need to get into the emotional stress and disruption they had caused, because the paper trail was doing all the talking for us. The end result was exactly what we had been hoping for. The case was dismissed entirely, with court costs awarded to me. They were ordered to pay me $9,200 to cover my legal fees, moving expenses, and damages. The judge even made a specific point to commend my documentation, saying it was extremely thorough and persuasive. When he announced the verdict, Robert looked like he had just swallowed a thumbtack, and Patricia didn't say a single word during the entire aftermath. Afterward, as I was walking to my car in the courthouse parking lot, feeling vindicated and relieved, I received a text message from Trevor. It read, "Bro, couldn't you have just talked to them instead of nuking the entire family like this?" I immediately blocked his number without responding. About 4 hours later, Patricia tried calling me. Against my better judgment, I actually answered the phone. Her voice came through sounding shaky and uncertain, but she was still putting on that fake, sweet tone that I had grown to despise. "Marcus, we don't have that kind of money just sitting around," she said. $9,000 is a lot for us to come up with. Do you really think taking this to court was necessary?" I stayed quiet for a moment, then responded, "I didn't think it was necessary either, but you made it necessary when you decided to sue me." She let out a sharp, exasperated sigh. "You didn't have to be so dramatic about everything. We're family, Marcus. This should have been handled with a simple conversation, not a court case." I hung up on her without saying another word. Then came the inevitable follow-up email, which arrived the next day. "We didn't realize how serious this situation was for you," it read. "We were just trying to help Trevor get back on his feet. We didn't mean to hurt you or make you feel unappreciated. It was too little and way too late. You don't get to gaslight someone for months, treat them like a walking wallet and personal ATM machine, and then act surprised when they finally enforce some boundaries and stand up for themselves. I don't care how unusual or extreme it might seem to get legal professionals involved over furniture. I wasn't just defending my physical possessions. I was defending my dignity and self-respect. The message I was sending was loud and clear. I'm not your backup plan anymore, and I'm not going to be taken advantage of just because I've been reliable in the past. By the end of that week, they tried sending me a family group message about meeting up to talk things through and hopefully repair our relationship. I didn't even read past the first sentence before deleting it. I have absolutely no interest in sitting around a living room pretending that everything is fine while they tiptoe around what they did to me. They treated me like a tenant when it was convenient for them, and then expected me to act like a family member when they needed grace and forgiveness. You can't have it both ways, and I was done playing that game. After that confrontation, everything went completely quiet for about a week. I'm not going to lie. Part of me expected some kind of additional guilt-tripping or manipulation attempts, but there was just radio silence from their end. A small part of me hoped that maybe they had finally realized how deeply they had messed up and damaged our relationship, but I should have known better than to give them that much credit. The silence was broken when I received an unexpected phone call from the building manager of the apartment complex. He sounded confused and slightly annoyed when he said, "Hey Marcus, I just wanted to let you know that your brother has been asking if we provide furniture for the units now." I closed my eyes and sighed deeply. "Nope, that's definitely between him and the people who threw me out," I replied. Apparently, Trevor had assumed that once I moved out of the apartment, my parents would immediately swoop in and restock everything with new furniture and appliances. But when he realized that the place was completely stripped down to its bare bones, and they weren't planning to replace a single thing, not even a basic chair to sit on, he started panicking about his living situation. According to the building manager, Trevor had been sleeping on a yoga mat for 2 nights straight and using his hoodie as a makeshift pillow. I guess he finally figured out that when I told him to figure it out, that wasn't just a casual phrase. It was his new reality, and he was going to have to deal with the consequences of his actions. By the end of that week, I heard through a mutual cousin that Patricia and Robert had been frantically trying to offload the apartment entirely. They had listed it online and even staged some photographs, but they weren't getting any serious offers or interest from potential renters. The reason why became pretty obvious when you thought about it. The unit looked like a complete ghost town. No furniture, nothing to make it look like anyone had ever actually lived there. Bare walls and scuffed floors where my area rug used to be. And apparently, Trevor had left a pizza box in the refrigerator during one of the apartment tours, which really showcased the level of class and responsibility he brought to the situation. Their little dream of turning the apartment into a profitable income stream was tanking fast, and the irony of the situation was absolutely beautiful. Here's the kicker. They couldn't even afford to furnish the place properly themselves because they had just spent thousands of dollars on legal fees trying to sue me and lost spectacularly. My lawyer fees had been covered as part of the settlement. My storage costs were reimbursed, and their Punish Marcus fund had turned into a complete financial sinkhole that was draining their resources. They tried desperately to hold on to the apartment for another month, but the situation was becoming increasingly untenable. Trevor was still living there, but now he was complaining non-stop about his circumstances. According to that same cousin who had been keeping me informed about the family drama, Trevor was texting our parents every other day with messages like, "This place sucks. I don't even have a chair to sit on." And my personal favorite, "Why didn't you tell me that adulting costs so much money?" Why indeed, Trevor? That's a question you probably should have asked yourself before assuming that everything would just be handed to you. Eventually, my parents made the difficult decision to sell the unit entirely, just to stop hemorrhaging money on a property that was becoming more of a liability than an investment. I heard through the family grapevine that Patricia was absolutely heartbroken about this turn of events. She had apparently harbored some elaborate fantasy about Trevor settling into the apartment, maybe getting his act together and becoming a responsible adult, and them visiting him downtown for weekend brunches like some kind of upper-middle-class sitcom family. But instead of that dream scenario, she found herself sitting in a bland, echoing apartment, trying to explain to real estate agents why there were no furnishings, why the walls still had visible damage from command strips I had used to hang artwork, and why their adult son was eating dry cereal directly from the box in the background during property showings. The unit did sell relatively quickly, but definitely not for the price they had been hoping to get. After paying taxes, realtor fees, and covering the amount they owed me from the court settlement, they basically broke even on the entire investment. They maybe walked away with a tiny profit, but definitely not enough to make all that drama and family destruction worth it in the end. As for Trevor, he had no choice but to move back home with our parents again, and this time his entitled attitude had evolved into full-blown resentment toward me. Because apparently, in his twisted logic, I was the villain in this story. He was under the impression that I had ruined his chance at stability and independence. He blamed me for taking his apartment, for not just leaving all my belongings behind like some kind of charitable donation, and for dragging everything through the legal system instead of just quietly accepting whatever they decided to do to me. He managed to get a new phone number and sent me a series of text messages about 3 weeks after the apartment sale. These were long, rambling paragraphs that combined half rant with half begging, filled with statements like, "You could have just been chill about the whole situation. You made everything worse for everyone involved. And mom and dad are struggling financially now, and it's your fault." I didn't respond to any of his messages. I didn't need to defend myself or explain my actions to someone who still didn't understand basic concepts like personal responsibility and consequences. He told on himself with every single line he wrote, revealing that he genuinely believed he had been finally getting his life together on my back, using my money and my hard work as a foundation for his own comfort and stability. Meanwhile, I was doing absolutely fine with my new living situation. With the settlement money I had received and the resources I had recovered from the apartment, I was able to put a down payment on my own place. It wasn't anything flashy or extravagant, just a small condo located just outside the city, but it was completely mine. No Trevor disrupting my peace, no unannounced guests taking over my living space, no passive-aggressive text messages about olive oil and paper towels, just pure, blissful peace and quiet. When I had my housewarming celebration, I made a deliberate decision not to invite anyone from my family. No parents, no extended relatives who might try to guilt me into reconciling. Just a couple of close friends and some pizza. It wasn't a party in the traditional sense, it was a boundary. It was my way of drawing a line in the sand and saying that you don't get to walk back into my life just because you're done throwing your tantrum and facing the consequences of your actions. Eventually, Robert tried to reconnect with me by sending a message that said, "We made mistakes in how we handled everything. You're still our son, and we want to work things out." Yeah, no kidding, you made mistakes. But here's the thing about mistakes. You don't get to use them like a get-out-of-jail-free card after you've metaphorically set the entire building on fire and watched it burn down around everyone. If you take someone's effort and investment, drain it completely dry for your own benefit, and then try to flip the entire situation for profit while throwing that person under the bus, you don't get to cry family when the whole scheme backfires spectacularly in your face. They had a clear choice at multiple points throughout this ordeal. They could have backed me up when I asked for basic fairness and respect. They could have told Trevor that he needed to pull his own weight and contribute like an adult. They could have supported both of their sons without stepping on one to artificially lift up the other. But they didn't make any of those reasonable choices. Instead, they gambled everything on me being their reliable, dependable son forever. The one who would stay quiet, stay helpful, stay cheap, and never push back no matter how badly they treated me. They were completely wrong about that assumption. They fundamentally misunderstood who I am and what I'm willing to tolerate. They thought they could continue taking advantage of my responsible nature indefinitely, but they discovered that even the most patient person has limits. When you consistently prioritize one child's comfort over another's basic dignity, when you expect someone to subsidize their sibling's lifestyle while receiving nothing but criticism in return, and when you try to profit from someone else's hard work and investment, you shouldn't be surprised when that person finally says, "Enough," and walks away. The most frustrating part of this entire experience isn't even the money I spent or the legal hassles I had to deal with. It's the realization that my own family was willing to exploit my reliability and good nature to such an extreme degree. They were perfectly comfortable watching me pay for everything, handle all the responsibilities, and create a beautiful living space, all while planning to eventually kick me out so they could profit from my work. They treated me like a placeholder tenant who was just keeping the apartment warm until the real beneficiary, Trevor, could move in and enjoy all the benefits without any of the effort or expense. When I finally stood up for myself and enforced some basic boundaries, they acted like I was the unreasonable one. They genuinely couldn't understand why I wasn't willing to continue being their financial safety net and unpaid property manager. The legal victory was satisfying, but the real victory was reclaiming my self-respect and proving that actions have consequences. I'm not interested in rebuilding a relationship with people who demonstrated so clearly that they view me as a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be respected. Family relationships should be based on mutual care and consideration, not on one person constantly sacrificing for others who take that sacrifice for granted. Trevor is still living with our parents, as far as I know, still probably convinced that his problems are everyone else's fault. My parents lost money on their investment property, lost their relationship with me, and learned that trying to manipulate and exploit your own children can backfire in spectacular ways. As for me, I'm genuinely happy with how everything turned out. I have my own place that's truly mine. I've learned valuable lessons about setting boundaries with family members, and I've proven to myself that I'm willing to fight for my own dignity and self-respect. Sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is walk away from people who don't value what you bring to their lives. The whole experience taught me that being the reliable one in the family doesn't mean you have to be the doormat. It doesn't mean you have to accept whatever treatment people decide to give you just because you share DNA. And it definitely doesn't mean you have to subsidize other people's poor decisions while they take credit for your hard work. I'm done being taken for granted, and I'm done being the family member who's expected to solve everyone else's problems while my own needs and feelings are completely ignored. That version of Marcus is gone, and he's not coming back. The new version has boundaries, self-respect, and a really nice condo that nobody can take away from him. TLDR. My parents offered me their empty apartment for low rent. I spent months and thousands of dollars furnishing it into a real home. Then they moved my freeloading brother in rent-free and tried to double my rent or kick me out entirely. When I took all my furniture and left, they sued me for theft. I won in court, got awarded $9,200 in damages. They had to sell the apartment at a loss, and I used the money to buy my own place. Sometimes standing up for yourself means burning bridges, but some bridges deserve to be burned.